Hello everyone. In today's lecture, we are going to talk about one of the leading poets of English literature, arguably one of the greatest poets ever to have written in English. His name is John Milton. Before moving on with our lecture today, I would request you all to please subscribe to my channel so that you may receive the videos as soon as I upload them. Uh, Now, moving on with our lecture today, I'll first give you a brief overview of how this lecture is going to proceed. First, we'll have a look at the brief biographical details of John Milton's life. We'll then go through the socio political context of the times in which Milton lived. We'll see then the literary evolution of Milton, his poems, how did they evolve, his prose writings, and obviously the great epic that he wrote. We'll then understand some of the features of John Milton as a poet, which make him a truly great poet that we regard him today. So, without any further delay, we'll start with the biographical details of John Milton. I would first tell you that John Milton was born in the year 1608 and he died in the year 1674. So, he lived through a time of relatively political turbulence. It was not an easy time in which he lived. He saw the reign of King James I, he saw the reign of King Charles I, he saw the Commonwealth period, and he also lived long enough to see the restoration of monarchy in England. Not only was he a man of letters, John Milton was also a man of action. He was a Protestant, he was a Puritan. He inherited it from his father, John Milton Sr., who was a Puritan and who was also a man of law and a moneylender too. His mother was a religious woman, and all these things combined uniquely in John Milton's life. He inherited the quality of Puritanism, the quality of religiosity, and a, an urge to be a man of affairs from his parents. He loved music, John Milton, and he was also a very educated fellow. He took a degree of MA from the University of Cambridge in the year 1632. So, all this shows that he was a man of tremendous intellectual ability. Now, we'll see the socio political context of the time in which Milton lived. It was a time of religious conflict. It was a time of conflict between the Anglican Church and the Puritans. It was a time when the King Charles I was the head of the Anglican Church and the Parliament was essentially Puritan. So it led to a continuous struggle, continuous deadlock between the king and his parliament. All this did not augur well for England as a country, and there was uh, always a sense of turbulence. It was always a sense of uh, unhappiness over the political affairs. Now, what happened then was that it was a time of corruption also. King Charles I was not the most ideal king, and it led to such a situation where a civil unrest became unavoidable. And the civil unrest broke out in the year 1642, and it ultimately led to the deposition of King Charles I, and it also led to his beheading. After this, England became a Commonwealth under the Prime Ministership of Oliver Cromwell. Milton took an active part in the rebellion against monarchy. He was a sworn Puritan, and he wrote such tracts during the time of civil unrest that uh, led people to rebel, and he was consistently on the side of Cromwell. His political activism led to him becoming one of the major assistants of Oliver Cromwell in his government. Milton became the Latin secretary to Cromwell during the times of the Commonwealth. But it was in 1660 that restoration of kingship took place, and the son of Charles I, that is Charles II, was recalled to rule England. And when Charles II ascended to the throne, it was a reign of vengeance that he ushered in. And it led to the arrest and execution of many of his critics who had supported the beheading of Charles I. But Milton was fortunate in this regard. He had friends like Andrew Marvell who pleaded in favor of Milton. And when the Act of Amnesty was passed by Charles I, Milton was granted amnesty. But on a personal front, Milton faced a lot of hardships. He became blind, and it was during this phase when he was struggling with his eyesight and was probably on the verge of complete blindness that he wrote Paradise Lost, the great epic for which he is known even to this day. So, this is the general political context, the socio political context in which Milton lived. And finally, as I've already told you, Milton passed away in the year 1674, leaving behind a rich legacy, but also a legacy that was too heavy for his successors in literature to shoulder. It is probably this uh, loftiness, this heaviness of Milton's genius that he is probably an unimitated poet. It is very difficult to imitate him, and the poets since have not been able to do it successfully. So Milton remains a unique figure, a figure who lived by himself and is alone by himself in this literary canon. Now we'll come to the literary life of John Milton. The first very famous poem that Milton wrote was on the morning of Christ's nativity. It was written in the year 1629. He also wrote uh, an ode on Shakespeare, and he also wrote a poem which was titled uh, El Allegro, and it is a pastoral poem. He also wrote a poem that is El Penseroso, that is also a pastoral poem. So, these are some of the early poems that John Milton wrote. Uh, in the year 1634, Milton wrote a masque that is that is titled Comus, and he also wrote sonnets in English. The year the years of civil unrest after 1642 was the time when literary creativity of Milton declined and he turned towards political activism. He became a pamphleteer and wrote prose tracts. One of the prose tracts that he wrote is Areopagitica. Areopagitica is about the freedom of expression, it is about the freedom of press, and it is a testimony to the democratic spirit that Milton believed in. Now, during the Commonwealth period, we do not see much of Milton as a writer or as a poet because he was involved in the political activities in those times. But after the restoration of kingship and after getting amnesty was the time when Milton wrote some of his greatest works. Milton wrote Paradise Lost, and it is an unsurpassable epic in English language. It was probably written in 1663, but it was published in the year 1667. And it is an epic in 12 books. It talks about the grand theme of the fall of man. It talks about the life of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. It talks about Satan, who tempted them to disobey God and to eat the forbidden fruit. Finally, they are punished by uh, being thrown to earth, where they become prey to diseases and death, and obviously all the other things that, in Shakespeare's words, the flesh is heir to. So, it was a grand work by John Milton. He wrote a sequel to Paradise Lost. It was called Paradise Regained. It was published in the year 1671. And 1671 was also the year in which Milton's classical tragedy Samson Agonistus was published. And these three works, Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained, and Samson Agonistus, have secured a place of greatness for John Milton in the literary canon of English literature. This is beyond doubt. Now we come to some of the main features of John Milton as a poet. John Milton has been praised for sublimity of thought, for his grandeur of expression. He is a poet of lofty ideals. He is not a humorous poet, he is a very serious poet. And he is also a poet who uses his erudition to the maximum extent in his poetry. His poetry is intellectual poetry. It appeals to the senses less than it appeals to the intellect. However, having said that, it remains a fact that as a poet, John Milton has immense rhythm, musicality sometimes, and he also has diction which is Latin, and sometimes it defamiliarizes the expressions and gives a certain poetic quality to his work that we cannot discern in other poets. John Milton was a poet who, what Longinus would call uh, a sublime poet. He had the ability to transport the readers to a world of his own imagination. The vivid details are presented through words, imagery, which is unique. And apart from all this, as a poet, Milton is is basically a humanist. He talks about human feelings, and he is also an activist in some ways. For example, his portrayal of Satan in Paradise Lost, especially in book 1 and 2, sometimes makes a reader feel that Satan is actually a rebellious hero, a democratic hero, much like what Milton himself was. William Blake believes Satan to be the hero of Paradise Lost. So obviously, there is differing opinion on this, but the fact I want to point out is that Milton was democratic in his spirit. He was a humanist. He was rebellious. He could not tolerate atrocities, oppression, and the plight of common man was something that always remained in his mind. So, even though he was an intellectual poet, he was a people's poet too, a people's writer too. And that is why his place is a unique and a significant place in the literary canon. I will end my lecture on this note, and I will request you all to please subscribe to my channel once again. See you in the next lecture. Thank you.